Hi, I'm Eli B. This video is going to be about using data keys to help you out with traffic signals.
Alright, this video is going to be about using data keys, how they will help you out with traffic signal controllers. I'm going to talk about, first what they are, what they're going to be able to do to help you. I'm going to give you the specific steps necessary to use them with the traffic signals, a couple pieces of troubleshooting, and some recommendations for best practices. To start off with some disclaimers, I do not work for Datakey and I don't work for the signal equipment companies. I have 15 plus years of experience as a traffic engineer, and this is based on that experience. What I'm going to show you might not work with every piece of equipment. I'm going to remind you to test everything in your office before you try to test it on the street. In this example, I am going to be using the Eagle 2070 ATC controller. Using the Georgia standard firmware and a data key just like this one, SFK 5 volt. Just for your information, if you don't have any or don't have enough data keys, anytime you have a new cabinet, traffic signal cabinet, you can usually get it in the drawer. Ask your state DOT. I know the GDOT local districts tend to have a couple of them on hand. You can go to Datakey themselves, and most of the signal equipment companies will sell them to you also. Alright, so what do the data keys do? They will back up every single piece of programming that is on a controller. Your phase data, your time of day plans, day of year settings, perhaps most importantly your communication settings, and you can use that to transfer all the data from one controller to another without using a laptop, without using a cable. If you don't have the right software, you can still transfer everything from one controller to another. The only thing that doesn't transfer over is your clock time. So if you're getting a controller fresh out of the box, it's got the old clock time on it, you have to make sure you remember to set that. Why are you going to use them? It's really important to have a backup ready of each controller if you have to replace it. And it's extra important, and I want to focus on this, it's extra important when a signal won't run properly with default timings. If you have a split phase intersection, it's set up, say, where the pedestrian phase is phase 3, if you put in a default controller, it's only going to be looking for phase 8 pedestrian detection, so it wouldn't work. If you have left turns that can't run together, there's a bunch of different things in your controller where you can't put a default controller in the cabinet and let it run. It's also a good thing to use if you're testing something new, but you want to be able to bring it back. You can make changes in the controller, and then when you're done, you can bring everything back to the way it had been. An example scenario where it might be really important to use your data keys, if you have a signal going in flash, and of course the guy who's on call usually is the youngest guy on the team. He goes out there, he finds the controller's failed. Maybe he hasn't been trained on how to use the laptop, or the laptop's not available, or he knows that the database on the laptop is not the most up-to-date. And he doesn't want to be able to take a controller with default timings and put it in there and let it run. So you would use a data key at this point to transfer everything from the old controller to the new one. Alright, so the step-by-step that you would use, the port is on the back of the CPU module. From the main menu, if you F out to the main menu, you hit 26D. That's the 3 steps that you push to get to the data key menu. Once you're in the data key menu, you type the 3 button to erase the data key, and then you go back and you hit the 2 button to save all the data on the controller to the key. Now hopefully if your controller's completely failed, then you backed up to the key before. If not, then you have to bring it back online and try to back up onto the key. Then once you have the new controller that you want to work, again, go to the data key menu, 26D, and type the 1 button, which will upload everything from the key, and make sure that you set the controller clock. When you do this, the controller status window will start flashing very rapidly. Don't turn off the controller until the status has returned to the normal once per second flashing. And just as a note of warning, if the controller is actively running an intersection, a couple of the settings in the controller, if they change when the programming is uploaded from the data key, this controller could put the signal into flash. Couple things to remember: you want to make sure that the firmware matches between the controllers. For example, if your old controller was a 334G controller and you're trying to upload onto 332G, it won't work. So you have to make sure that the spare controller that you're using to replace it matches the firmware on the old one. And it's a good idea to label on the front of your controller what the firmware was, so if the controller's completely dead, you know what you're looking at. Again, watch the flashing active light, and don't forget to set the controller clock. Again, a couple of the settings, if they change while the controller is running an intersection, you can put it into flash. If you change the active phases, anything with the ring structure, anything like that, the controller is programmed, as a safety measure to put it into flash. So it's a good idea to put the new settings onto a controller before you bring the cabinet out of flash. A couple of error messages you might see. Again, you have to erase the key. You can't just save to the data key if there's information already on it. You have to erase everything that's on it first. If you see this one, open error equals 246, it either means that the key's not put in and twisted properly, or you could have a bad key. It could also mean that you had a bad port. This error message right here means that you're trying to import from the wrong firmware. So the number of bytes on the key doesn't match the number of bytes that it's expecting. And this one is something that you'll see occasionally on some kinds of hardware. It usually does not actually mean that it failed. It's just it's improper reading that shows up, but usually this means that you actually did import all the data from the key. Recommendations for best practices. My recommendation is always to leave the key in the back of the controller. You know where it is. It's easy to update it if you've changed anything. Put a label on the data key with the controller ID and the firmware, and also put a label on the controller saying what your firmware is, if it's 332G or whatever. That way, if you're replacing a dead controller, you know what the firmware had been on it before. Don't forget to back up at regular intervals. Every time you do your standard cabinet maintenance, put it on your to-do list to back up the data key. And back up after any important changes. If you've retimed a corridor, go back through when you're done and back up all the data keys. In summary, the data keys are a useful tool that you can use for transferring complete programming information. Everything that's on one controller, you want to put it on another. And it's essential, and I want to mark this again, it's essential to do this when you can't run a default controller in a cabinet. And just a reminder, everything that I've told you to do, make sure you test it in a controlled environment before you test it on field equipment.
Okay, I hope this information has been useful for you. If you go to my website, there's a cheat sheet you can print out that'll remind you of all the steps necessary. And if you fill out a short survey, I'll mail you a laminated copy of the cheat sheet that you can keep with you in your traffic signal bag.